my very good friend, John Quijada. John has something a bit different for us if you've seen some of his previous LCC presentations, and I will go ahead and let him take it. John.
So our slides ready to go?
Yeah, you should be just, there you go, should be ready to go.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is John Quijada. It's around 2:30, so about now the insulin spiking should begin. And so if any of you want to take a nap following lunch, the only thing you'll be missing is Aiguapsh Kong Tishpan, which is what I call the course traveled by the Ithquil language in its development. It's just similar to the course being traveled by this guy as he tries to break one tackle, an obstacle after another, stumbling his way toward a goal, which is exactly what that word means. And we're going to analyze it as to how it can do that. I've spoken at several conlang conferences before. I've made a point of never speaking about my own work. So today is an exception. I'm going to actually talk about my own language, Ithquil, which has become a little bit notorious and infamous. Let you know how it all came to be. Anyway, it started back in the 70s when I was a teenager. I was introduced to the music of the French jazz rock group Magma. I had read Tolkien and I admired Elvish and all that, but that's not what gave me the bug. It was listening to the music of this band and their lyrics in the Kobayan language, de Anzik Kontakos Kunkarman Stodvodamelekam, et cetera, et cetera. It's very pseudo-Germanic, kind of pseudo-Hungarian thing. And the way they sang this so unabashedly just, I don't know, touched a nerve in me. I said, if they can do it, I can do it. So that made me go to my local library and read the Learn a Language section. And the first book I grabbed was one on Swahili. And so that introduced me to Bantu phonology, which I merged with Relexified Spanish to create Mbozo, my first little sketch lang. This is about age 14 for me. The next language was Skeoj, which I basically closed my eyes and started banging randomly on a typewriter to create long strings of gibberish, which I would then parse to see where the cool looking syllables were. Which gave the name of the language, Skeoj, and that was the next language that lasted for about a week. And then the number 3 was the Scandinavian-inspired language, Hjuln. And let's see, I was also inspired by the reruns I was watching at the time of the old 1960s Mission Impossible TV series. And they would have these episodes behind the Iron Curtain in these fake countries like the East European People's Republic, each of which came with a conlang. I just used to think this was cool. Zona restrict. So I decided to make my own version of a kind of an authoritarian language. Let's go. Pardon? Okay. And that language was called People's Unlimited Express Mode, which actually the real name of it in the language is here, Lokaz Kadu. That's what it meant. I just happen to remember that. I don't remember how the language worked at all, but it came with my first conscript, which you can see up there. It's, I think, some kind of a abjad or abugida of some kind. So this is all from my notes I found in a drawer of my old work from, oh my gosh, 40 years ago. I then, by 1978, I was a freshman at university studying linguistics. And of course, I had a new library to raid. And this was the linguistics section at that library. And this is one of the books I came across right away, The Grammar of Case by John Anderson in the Cambridge series. And it was a book-length analysis of Charles Fillmore's work from his seminal paper from 1968, The Case for Case. Some of you may have heard of that paper before. It's basically, as far as I know, it's the first non-Chomskyan look at syntactical relations and essentially started the cognitive linguistics movement as the primordial seed. And I was just blown away by what this book had to say about how language could work. That plus this other book or other paper I discovered, Catford's 1977 paper on the Caucasian languages, which included pages such as this, the phoneme inventory of Ube. And I just looked at this and this is truth is stranger than fiction stuff. 20 uvular phonemes. And this was actually spoken by human beings up till 1992. And I just looked at that and said, anything's possible. I don't, Indo-European, goodbye, So I started on this route to create a language that was going to be the ultimate kitchen sink language. It was going to have the coolest features from all languages around the world, all in one language. Of course, the definition of what was a cool feature was going to be my own subjective aesthetic sense. And the first one was Imran. This is the primordial ancestor of Ithquil. Every language beginning with this one has just simply been an improvement and an expansion of the one since. So this is Ithquil in its absolute embryonic stage. Sentences in Imran. I found this page in a drawer, as I said. Siene que ad Imran. You can see it still uses that same script that I had created. And at this point, we don't see any sentences about clowns. So at this stage, my psychology was still in the normal range. You can see I was now getting into ejective consonants. The small animals are afraid of the larger and stronger ones. So that's the surviving record of that. By the next year, excuse me, pardon me. This had turned into a language called Azkaran, which was a little more sophisticated and had a new script, which my brother at the time, I remember, called the chicken scratch script, because that's what it looked like to him. That's what it looks like to me now. So the language itself, Azkaran, was a word that meant now it is real. And I found this page too. This was the script, or a piece of the script. So this is the kind of thing I was spending my free time doing around the age 20 or so, instead of, dating. Needless to say, I'm getting a little weirder all the time. By the next year, this had turned into something called Elanika, and I had no idea at the time that I had reinvented the native ethnonym of the Greek language. But it was kind of a pretty language. Nice sound to it. I haven't the slightest idea what it means. But, again, just a paper I found in a drawer, but I had kept a list of each language's name as I made them. So that's why I'm able to remember the names and what year I was working on them. By 82, this had become Saantikas. And at this point, I've got sentences like, you are stupid and really uncoordinated. Sentu ponchelu. And I like this one, the last one. Their mother gave birth to a fish. Kiandon la mauna kiunusa. Anyway, the third sentence has a story behind it. Not to be born is best. I forget which Greek philosopher that was who said that, but I decided to translate that sentence. Kia kiu nesh shketha. And you'll notice that I took the liberty to put it into the script at the time. And the reason for that was that I ended up making a bumper sticker of that phrase, and I put it on my car at the time. So I was the only person driving around the freeways of LA with a bumper sticker on a car that said not to be born is best in their own conlang. This kind of tells you that my psychology had now taken a dark turn. So again, it was dating related. So by 1984, I had moved to the San Francisco Bay Area, and the language was now called Sayarima. And I was getting more and more sophisticated all the time. And I had totally forgotten until I researched these documents for this presentation, that this language had a new script that I forgot all about. And it was really cool. Look at that. I mean, this surprised the hell out of me 2 months ago when I found this in a drawer. I said, wow, I had no idea I created this. Here's a bit close up. I should have done something with this. This is a cool looking thing, isn't it? I don't even remember doing it. It was just, I came across this page, which was definitely from my notes on Sayarima, and I noticed there's a conscript. Where'd that come from? And then the next page in my drawer was this. I said, that's my handwriting, so to speak. And so sometimes I even surprise myself. Anyway, but mid-80s, this had kept going, evolving into first Andarima, then a language called Ulchalda, a name of which I stole from a board game. At the time, it was the name of an alien race in a sci-fi board game called Star Force Alpha Centauri. And I just thought it was a cool name, so I stole it. And that turned into Alareku, which by the next year, 1987, reached the culmination of my efforts. Dikalpa. This is when I thought I was done. I had reached the ultimate kitchen sink language, and I was done conlanging. Dikalpa was a phrase in the language that meant, let's do some talking. And because I thought it was all done, I wrote it all up into a formal presentation grammar. Here we go. Here's a page from that grammar just to show off some of the sentences. We'll talk about the script in a second. But as you can see, I'm now starting to get sentences like clowns don't like to play by the rules. And I'm very proud of sentence 79 here because I have to be the only conlanger in the history of the world who would actually have the nerve to put in an example sentence in their grammar. Does his home smell like shit to you? Again, my psychology is obviously going down the drain here. Here's the script. I found a page of it. It was based on the Tibetan script, which I had seen, but the very first time I ever saw the Tibetan script written out, the book was turned sideways. So I saw the Tibetan script sideways when I first saw it, and it looked so cool. So I basically took a bunch of the Tibetan letters and turned them sideways, and that was it. And this again is either an abjad or abugida. I don't remember which. All of my scripts were at that time. And as I said, I thought I was done conlanging at this point, but then something happened. I discovered these books, Lakoff and Ron Laniker's books, and plus the fuzzy logic stuff from Zadeh. And when I read these books, I realized, oh my gosh, I've only been working with the tip of the iceberg. And so I had to rethink my whole conlanging world and start all over again. I had to throw out about 75% of it, because what I realized now was my goal was no longer to create a kitchen sink language. My goal now was going to be to create a language that actually expressed verbally all the things going on in our heads that the cognitivists were showing is occurring, but never makes it out of our mouths because of the limitations of natural languages. Well, I was going to create a language that did express all that extra stuff going on our head. And so my whole goal changed. And so part 2 of the whole IthCo experience began. At this point, the language was called Hialith now, but I got sidetracked for 2 years on a science fiction project with my brother. We decided we were going to write the report of the first xenoanthropological expedition to another world, the Eta Cassiopeia 4. Eta Cassiopeia is a G-type star about 19 light years away, and the story was that we had received radio signals from them of a newscaster saying weather reports, and of course they were broadcasting in my language. And so it was going to be part of a whole con world. And we ended up creating this con world. We had maps, histories. Here's the map of the languages, language families. There's Kialith there. spoken in the central region and all of its related languages. There was an Eastern language family. There was an island continent on the other hemisphere that had its own languages. And I started to create all these things. And while my brother was writing about the history of their wars and their dynasties and all that. And we had population maps and climate maps. We even did plate tectonic and rift zone maps. We had ocean currents. We had a folder this thick of drawings of the flora and fauna and everything. It was quite a project. I abandoned it because we realized that we were just recreating Earth. It was just the same old stuff, wars, politics, dynasties. There was nothing innovative about it. And so we kind of got disillusioned with our own work and just stopped. So at that point, about the mid to late 1990s, I discovered these two other cognitive linguists, Guy Fauconnier from UC San Diego and Leonard Talmy. And when I got exposed to these books, it kickstarted me into the final drive to finish what I'd been working on all these years. And so for all through the late 90s into the early aughts, I basically was spending as much of my free time as I could trying to finish this project, including during this time the creation of the morphophonemic script. As I told you before, up to this time, all my scripts had been abjads or abugidas. And I'd always been enamored of the Klingon-looking scripts from Star Trek. So I decided to systematize those and use them as a basis for a script. I had also planned for a long time to use the mutational principles from the Brahmi and Ethiopic scripts, if you're familiar with those, where they're abjads or abugidas, I forget which, and pieces of the characters mutate to show the different vowels. So I started to do the same thing with Klingon-esque looking letters to make these little mutations. When suddenly it hit me, the morphophonology of the language, which at this point was called Ayaquith, as I recall, Ayaquith, its whole morphophonology was based on mutational principles, consonant and vowel mutations, whole series of them. And it suddenly occurred to me, wait a minute, why don't I just do a one-to-one mapping of the characters to the morphophonology rather than go through, make them be just phonetic, phonological in nature, skip the phonological part and just map the mutations to the mutations of the morphology itself, the morphophonology, I should say. Which is what I did, and therefore by created or independently created the morphophonemic script, which Carl talked about a little bit in his presentation. And I just wanted, I don't expect you to, we're not going to go through all this. This is just an excerpted page from the IthQuil website showcasing how the morphophonemic script works. The example sentence, if only the physician wouldn't eat his food in one gulp like that. Igrawilethrar oi eglulon. I'm not capable of creating a normal sentence when it comes to examples. It's got a lot of morphology in it, all captured in 6 characters. How is this possible? If you start analyzing these, you'll discover that the only phonetic information, only phonological information, purely phonological information, is 4 consonant groups. G, r, gl, and n. The rest of everything you see there is entirely morphological, grammatical information by which the reader reconstructs the pronunciation based on their knowledge of the grammar of the language. What it allows for is an extremely abbreviated writing system. The downside, of course, is it's impossible to read the script until you know the language, because you have to know the grammar of the language for it to work. So that's how the morphophonemic principle works. Lends itself very well to a highly inflecting language like IthQuil. By January of 2004, I was ready to spring it on the world, which I did. Version 1 of it. And I thought it was going to get about 15 minutes of fame and get commented on by maybe 5 people on the conlang mailing list, and that was it. But its 15 minutes kept getting extended and prolonged. And then someone in Russia wrote a big article about it, comparing it to Robert Heinlein's speed talk language from his novella Gulf, Language of Supermen. And it was in a Russian language technology magazine that with about 75,000 subscribers. So suddenly I'm being inundated by emails from the Russian speaking world, wanting to know everything and anything about the language and twisting my arm to give them a more pronounceable version of the language, because this being a total thought experiment, and I never gave 1 ounce of thought that anyone would try to learn this language or try to speak it. So learnability was never an issue. This was all an experiment to see if, all that stuff in our heads, the cognitivists tell us is going on, could be actually verbally expressed. And that was the sole goal. So anyway, they basically talked me into producing a simplified morphophonology and phonology, which was Ilaksh, which was presented in 2007, massively streamlined and reduced phoneme inventory, but I compensated for it by introducing all kinds of tone rules, so it's a massive tone language, which I can't even pronounce because I'm useless at tone languages. It also featured a nonlinear 2-dimensional script, which we'll actually look at a little bit more closely later. Anyway, Ilaksh was a flop. Nobody hardly got any reaction from anyone, and I didn't like it either because of all the tones. So I withdrew it after a year or so. But the lessons I learned from creating it, such as figuring out how to do stem incorporation, I then used to revise the first version into the 2011 IFQuil version, which is the for up till this year was considered the definitive version, and what I thought was going to be the last version of the language. This is the language that I ended up publishing the grammar book in. It's the language in which the music that I create with David, my lead singer. Those of you who may know, I compose music as well. We put a bunch of videos on YouTube, sung in IFQuil, and this is the version used. And here's the same sentence in all 3 versions of the language. The incompetent tailor began to cry after learning about the clown's new directive on nakedness. To me, clowns have it's like, I'm fascinated by all aspects of life that have a truth is stranger than fiction quality. And to me, clowns are like top of the list, if clowns didn't exist, you couldn't make them up. Nobody would believe you, so to me, they're just, it's not that they're evil. It's just that they don't mesh with what I would think of as, reality. So, I want to attempt the Ilaksh because I don't remember how the tone system works. Looking at that Ilaksh script, the 2-dimensional script, I really wanted to do something with this further. Every part of this has meaning. The shapes of those container-looking things, which I called cartouches for lack of a better term, the shape is meaningful. It tells you what stem, the vertical versus horizontal orientation, the color scheme, light, medium, dark, and textured, carries meaning. The pattern of overlapping of the shapes indicates syntactical relations. The left, right, top, bottom placement of the glyphs within the containers is meaningful. The vertical versus diagonal versus horizontal orientation of the glyphs themselves is meaningful. The glyphs are made from 2 back-to-back trapezoids in order to form a hexagonal shape. I stole those shapes, the idea of those shapes, from a Star Trek Next Generation episode. Some of you may recognize them. It's an obscure episode called, I forget which episode, what the name of the episode. It's the one about the Shellyak and then who they think they're very superior to humans, and they have a language that the universal translator can't translate. Well, there's about a 3-second clip right at the beginning of the episode where they show the Shellyak language flowing past. It's like a variable flow script where larger hexagons move slower than the smaller ones as they go rolling by. Really cool looking thing. Anyway, I said, that's a great idea. So I stole the glyph shapes for Ilak. What I wanted to do with this was not only just create wall hangings out of wood and metal and stuff. I wanted to create mobiles, like Calder style mobiles that would hang independently, and they'd move like independent of one another, so that people walking around it would see a different message, different sentence, because the shapes change, and when the shapes change or reverse, that's a different stem, and the left-right orientations change, and so I wanted to explore that, but I never did. And now I'm too old. Oh, well. Anyway, those Russians, the adventure with them was not over. I got contacted by a group of people who were associated with something in Russia and Ukraine called psychonetics, which is a movement there, or some kind of pseudoscience, so that they're trying to change the world by changing the human mind. And the reason, number one reason they think the human mind is not used to its full potential is because of the limitations of natural language. So they were looking for a language that does more than natural languages, that doesn't have those limitations. And yoo-hoo, what had I been working on for 30 years? So they found my work, and I ended up going to Russia and also to Kyiv, Ukraine twice, 2 years in a row, and all expenses paid by the Russian government. It was just surreal. And it was all written up in an article in the New Yorker magazine back in 2012. If you Google my name and the word New Yorker, you'll find the article. Or you can Google the name of the article, which is Utopian for Beginners. And it tells you all about the adventure and misadventures I had there. Really, really wild, surreal situation. It turned out to have a sinister twist to it. It turned out their interest in my work and the language was all part of a plot, a centuries-long plot they had to take over the world, literally. And I'm not exaggerating. It's wild. I assume they're all under arrest right now. So anyway, what is it about this language, Ithquil, that continues to interest people? That why is its 15 minutes not going away? What's so unique about this language that people keep latching onto it? From my perspective, I think of it as basically the fact that the language makes so many things transparent. It's the language itself, its grammar and its morphophonology is very transparent in conveying all kinds of things, and such as Gestalt conceptualizations, so that you can have a word for a particular tool, and by just tweaking the morphophonology, turn it into gestalts, a tool into a tool set. Discrete components can become hierarchies, so that leaves become branches of leaves, become trees, become forests, all by just tweaking the morphology. Objective versus subjective phenomena, so that a sentence describing a woman walking down a staircase can then be used to describe something subjective, like a description of Marcel Duchamp's nude descending a staircase, number 2. Linear empirical phenomena, like the astronomer looking at the stars through a telescope, can be shifted purely at the morphophonological level to describe, a couple stargazing. Reductionist versus holistic, analytic versus synthetic phenomena, all just tweaking of the morphophonology, so that a reductionist style description of something like photosynthesis can be transformed into its natural embodiment very easily. The work of Zadeh had a big influence on the language, so that prototypes and prototypical categorization schemes are very, very systematized in the language, so that something like a ball can then be tweaked to refer to a very atypical member of the category, and then all the way to the fuzzy version of it, so that you are now approaching an object or an entity that is actually closer to a different set than the prototype. The whole Zadeh's whole idea of a fuzzy set. The work of Ptolemy had a great influence on the language in terms of its causation dynamics. So that the case system, version 3 of the language, the 2011 version, has 96 noun cases. 12 of which, or 11 of which are devoted simply to the dynamics of what we usually use, nominative versus accusative, or and dative, or ergative and absolutive, depending on which scheme we're looking at. So that a sentence like, I'm angry because of the clown, using these 3 words, asbalti exoil, just by changing the noun case on one of the words, can convey very different things. So the language is extremely flexible that way. Let's look at that word that we saw at the beginning of the presentation, Aiguapshkangtishpand. It's based on a root, the gua part, that refers to any rapid ambulation, so running, or a shark going after something, or any kind of rapid ambulation. And we can use all this morphology, which is described and listed here, to create a word which transparently translates as one manages to achieve a goal despite hindrances and obstacles while, and I just used a bunch of words here, but while rapidly ambulating in a manner that's, like this. That's what some of that morphology is, which I translate as running / jumping / stepping, stumbling, etc. So that shows you how the morphophonology can work. Similarly, the language is rather oligosynthetic in that words are made up of pieces and parts that are transparently put together. And one aspect of it is that there is no single definitive word for any given abstract concept in the language. The oligosynthetic nature of the lexicomorphology allows a speaker to craft a word for something based on their own relationship to the word. Let's look at the word, a word, or 2 words for philosophy. They're both based on the same root. We're going to analyze these in the next slide here. The root here is the CA part, sa, in the middle of each word, which is a stem, actually, I should say a stem, not a root, that means literally, epistemological basis for the ontological and or metaphysical existence of a thing. What does all that gobbledygook mean? Basically, it's a stem that means how we know what something is and what it's for, right? So this stem sa means how we know what something is and what it's for. Well, since philosophy as a field tries to answer the question of ontology, what something is in reality, metaphysics, our relationship to what that thing is, and epistemology, how it is we know all that, it makes for a great root to base a word for philosophy on, which we then use all this other morphology around it to create a word that is usable. The first one you can think of as the neutral word for philosophy, translating something like everything having to do with a set of formal theories to which people adhere that explains how we know what something is and what it's for. Now, the second word uses the same root, but it uses different affixes and morphology. And this is what a cynic would say is the word for philosophy, someone who thinks philosophy is bunk. And this word is saying everything having to do with a set of so-called theories, which people don't really adhere to, that purports to explain what something is and what it's for and how we know it. So you can have two different words, and this applies to words like war. This could democracy, anything. You know, if a dictator were to be asked, if a dictator were an Ithkuil speaker and were asked what the word for democracy is, he's going to give you a different word than someone like Barack Obama. You know, so the language allows this kind of flexibility. Also looking at the oligosynthetic construction of words, the language allows you to create words for a phenomena that for which there has never been a word before, and which you can then make up as a word, which a hypothetical speaker of the language would understand based on the transparent morphology. Here's an example. This is one that one of the fans online created. This is a word describing a situation where one lets a normally unavailable opportunity pass them by because it's not seen as being the optimal instance or form of that opportunity, despite the likelihood that such an optimal instance or opportunity is never going to arise. So, for example, letting a bottle of expensive wine go past its prime because you never know when it's going to be the right moment to drink it. Or more importantly, letting an opportunity for true love pass you by because you think, well, maybe someone better will come along. So it's quite possible someone in this room has experienced "Eis la servia lynch," you know, all captured in one word like that. For the past 6 years, I've allowed the online fans to twist my arm yet again into creating a fourth version of the language, which I introduced in February of this year. I didn't want to. I was not very motivated to do it, but I promised them I would, so I've been working on it. And because what happened was there was about a dozen people on these online forums, maybe a dozen and a half people who essentially convinced me that they really, truly want to speak this thing. They want to learn it and speak it and have it be real in the world. You know, I think they're crazy, but hey, that's what they want. And they also, more importantly, they also identified, because they were actually trying to learn it, some problems with the existing version, some ambiguities and some difficulties they discovered when, you know, diving deep into it. And they offered suggestions and ideas for how it could be improved. So this new version essentially is like a collaboration between me and those fans to create a version that is actually learnable. And all the principles of the language are the same. It's just the morphophonology is far, far more systematic and logically produced. The language is now completely agglutinative, for example. It got rid of most of the synthetic morphology. I also use the opportunity to vastly expand the lexicon. So it's got 6,000 roots now or more. Anyway, the last thing I want to do is show you one aspect of the new version of the language that I'm proud of, because no previous version of the language had done this, was able to do this. I've always admired, or actually maybe just been blown away by the ability of the English language to string prepositions one after another into long strings where the prepositions function as locative adverbs to describe various subtle trajectories. As far as I know, English is the only language that does this. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Imagine we're outside of a basement nightclub. We're out on the sidewalk, and the owner of that nightclub is talking to a friend outside the club, and he invites that friend to come to the balcony in back of the club. Now, to get to this balcony, we have to go down into the club, cross the dance floor, up a flight of stairs, down a hallway, out the back door. And how does this nightclub owner convey that invitation to his friend in English? He says, "Come on down inside, up along through, out back to the balcony." Now, everyone in here who is a native speaker of English can parse that. We all That just comes across to we native speakers of English as a mundane sentence that anyone might say. And yet, look what's going on in there. On, down, inside, up, along, through, out, back, to. When I say it that way, you think I'm just saying a bunch of words in gibberish. But I'll suddenly put it into a real sentence. Come on down inside, up, along, through, out, back to the balcony. I mean, you try and put this sentence into Google Translate for French or Spanish, you're not going to get anything close to this. So I wanted to see if I could get the new language to mimic this, to accomplish the same thing, essentially, create these trajectories, these moving image pictures in language. And I found a way to do it. These roots for anything that implies a position root in space, or a translative motion root, any kind of trajectory. The language has lots and lots of roots for these. These roots, TR, KR, KF, I discovered I could use them to also be affixes with some morphology attached to them, little trailing Ys and Ws, which tell you the particular orientation of the trajectory, coming versus going, up versus down when it comes to ascending, descending, curving to the left, curving to the right, front, back, those kinds of oppositions, as well as the vowel in front that further defines, I won't get too technical, but it further defines the nature of the trajectory. So I could use each one of these motion or positional roots as an affix to string along the same way that English does. And so we get a sentence like, watch me. Oh. Translation, come on down inside, up, along, through, out, back to the balcony. Thank you for your attention.